Hello folks, it's the Pacer Chaser again. Welcome to another one of my videos. In this one we're going to look at a temporary light rail line that existed in Manchester for 3 weeks in March 1987. It was part of the lead up to the building of the Metrolink tram system, the highly successful system. Hopefully this will be the first of 2 parts. In this one we're firmly in the office come workshop at home. I'm going to show you some photographs and items of publicity and things to do with the line. The second one hopefully will be a site visit to where the line was. There isn't anything left of it. I've had a quick look on various internet sources, but I will go there. I'm doing this video in July 2023, towards the end of July, and the hope is that the second part, the site visit, will be sometime in the middle of September. So if you're watching after the middle of September 2023, then it should be on my channel already. So a bit of background. The Victorian railway builders around Manchester, the railways were built by various different companies who, in common with most other areas of the country, didn't get on with each other very well. So there wasn't any coordination between the various companies, and they all built their own termini around Manchester. The cutbacks of the Beeching area and before and after left Manchester with 2 main terminus stations: Piccadilly, which in a previous life had been known as London Road, and Victoria, opposite ends of the city centre to each other. In the early 70s a bus service was started between the two, the Centre Line bus service, but there was a desire to build a rail connection between the two. In 1969 the Selneck Passenger Transport Executive, or PTE for short, Selneck stood for South East Lancashire, North East Cheshire, that had been formed to oversee transport in the Manchester area. In 1974 that became Greater Manchester PTE. In the early 70s they started some proposals for an underground rail tunnel between Piccadilly and Victoria. It was known as the Pick-Vic project. It would have involved electrifying various lines around and about Manchester to provide a high frequency rail service. Obviously it would have been quite expensive to build an underground railway, and eventually it was realised they couldn't get funding for it. In 1977 it was officially abandoned, and they started to look for alternatives. As the 80s went on, they got more and more interested in building light rail, or tramways as we might call them, and that was where the planning for Metrolink started. Quite separately, in the 80s, British Rail Engineering Limited, or BREL, or BREL for short, they became interested in trying to build light rail vehicles in this country, because there was growing interest in various towns and cities in light rail vehicles. They realised that they probably wouldn't be able to design any. They might have to bring designs in from other countries, but there was no reason they couldn't build them here, so they were getting interested. And they wanted to have a kind of demonstration line to show interested parties the capabilities of light rail. The Tyne and Wear Metro had opened in the early 1980s, and about the time this trial line went in 1987, most of the Docklands Light Railway was being built. It was just about ready to open, but they were all segregated systems, didn't run on the streets. So they wanted to do a demonstration that showed the capabilities of light rail vehicles and a bit of on-street running as well, or at least simulated on-street running. Now the new Greater Manchester PTE were interested in introducing light rail vehicles, so they approached them with a view to hosting the demonstration, and the PTE agreed. They looked round Greater Manchester for suitable sites, and they eventually settled on part of the Fallowfield Loop line, which ran from junctions at Gorton and Fairfield around a large part of South Manchester and brought you out near Trafford Park. At the time, in 1987, it was in use for freight trains. It had a passenger service from when it opened in 1892 to 1958, and it had been freight only since then. It still had a handful of freight services, about 3 every day, to and from the container terminal at Trafford Park. I'll just show you this quite crudely drawn map that I've done that shows you what I'm talking about. So this line from Piccadilly along through Gorton, Fairfield up to Guide Bridge, that was the start of the famous Woodhead route that went across to Sheffield. Just after the Second World War, that had been electrified at 1500 volts DC overhead. The depot for the trains that worked that line was at Reddish, which was on this line. This is the Fallowfield loop that I'm talking about, so it ran from junctions at Gorton and Fairfield. The two spurs came together at Hyde Road junction, and then it ran down to Reddish depot. So this northern part of the line was electrified at 1500 volts DC overhead as well, so that trains could get to and from the depot. The Woodhead route closed as a through route in 1981. It was cut back to Hadfield, so it was a local service from Manchester Piccadilly to Hadfield. At that point, the locomotives that were based at Reddish depot were withdrawn and sent away to scrap. So the only allocation it had were the local 3-coach trains that ran the service up to Hadfield. They were moved away in April 1983 when Reddish depot closed. They were moved to Longsight depot, but they had to be towed to and from there because Longsight and the line past it were electrified at 25,000 volts AC. But then they were withdrawn in 1984 and replaced with other trains. The line to Hadfield was re-electrified at 25,000 volts AC, so they got rid of the DC electrification and electrified it at 25,000 volts. When Reddish depot closed in 1983, this bit from Gorton and Fairfield round through Hyde Road to the depot was de-electrified. The depot was closed, as we said, so the electrification was removed from this line, so it didn't convert it to 25,000 volts AC. But a lot of the structures that had held the overhead wires remained in place, and that was helpful when they came to do the demonstration line in 1987, because they reused a lot of them to hold the overhead line. They did put some more modern poles along as well, both to augment the original structures and also to demonstrate new types of support pole to the various people who came along to visit. So this photo we've been looking at shows you some of the more modern poles in place there at the temporary station that was built. This is a photograph by Dr. Neil Clifton. It's licensed under the Creative Commons license for sharing, as are most of the photographs that I'm going to show in this video. So yeah, some of the support poles apparently were due for I think I'm going to pronounce this right, Chuan Mun light rail system in the New Territories near Hong Kong. They were apparently destined for there, but they were demonstrated here. There were various different types demonstrated, and there was some on-street running demonstrated as well. You can't really see in this photograph, but behind the platform there was a short section of track inlaid into the paving to sort of show on-street track. So the overhead wires on the demonstration line were 750 volts DC overhead. And the demonstration took part where Hyde Road station had been. They built a temporary station for the demonstration line and called it Debdale Park. They were originally going to put it in the old site of Reddish depot, but they found that the Hyde Road site would be easier to secure. They could fence it off and lock it up on a night much more easily. The access road to the goods yard at Hyde Road station was still in place, although Hyde Road station had closed in 1958 and been demolished, and the goods yard itself had closed in 1965. The access road for the goods yard was still there, so they could use that to access the site. They built a temporary platform. A firm called Fairclough Engineering had devised a platform system of wooden platforms. At the time, quite a few stations in Greater Manchester were being reopened, so they'd kind of devised this design for the Greater Manchester PTE. You could just mix and match the bits you wanted. So some of that was supplied to build the temporary platform. So they had the overhead wires, they had the platform, they needed a train. So what they got was this. As I mentioned, the Docklands Light Railway was under construction at the time. So the cars for that railway were being built. They were built by Linke Hoffmann Busch in Germany, but they were being sent across to be fitted out by GEC, who were based in Manchester at the time. Now GEC were one of the partners in the demonstration line, so they borrowed one of the new cars when it was delivered from Germany and sent it to Manchester to run on the demonstration line. So this is Docklands Light Railway car number 11. It's another photo by Dr. Neil Clifton. Now I know what you're thinking. Anybody who knows the Docklands Light Railway, it's powered by a third rail. Yes, that's true. So they had to modify the car by fitting a pantograph to it, the structure that you can see that collects the current from the overhead wire. What they did for the trial, they closed the railway line to normal rail traffic during the daytime for the length of the trial. They built a siding. Now, nobody's ever been able to say where the siding was. Various sources say that they built a siding. I believe what they actually did, the line you can see here was actually disused at the time. All traffic in both directions used this line. So I believe what they actually did was just bring a little bit of that back into use. So during the day, it was close to normal rail traffic. The light rail vehicle, car 11, could just go up and down as it pleased. And then at the end of the day, it would have been shunted into its siding, which, as far as I'm aware, was on the other running line. And it was locked out of the way, and then the line was reopened to normal traffic, and it was used for freight trains during the night. So they got the train to run on it, they got the power lines, they got a temporary platform, they got everything they needed to do. The overhead wires were stretched out from Debdale Park station, the former Hyde Road, southwards for just over a mile to the site of Reddish Depot. So they got everything in place apart from the power supply. Now, British Rail were one of the partners of this demonstration line, and they came up with quite an ingenious solution. So apparently by this stage of the game, the spare round from Fairfield Junction to Hyde Road Junction was disused. All the traffic that still used the Fallowfield Loop line came around from the Gorton direction. So what they did was they parked a Class 303 electric multiple unit on the little spare round from Fairfield Junction to Hyde Road Junction. One of these, in other words, this train here. These were originally built for the Glasgow area, but service cuts in the early 1980s meant that some of them were surplus up there and they were transferred down to Manchester. And they replaced the DC units on the Hadfield and Glossop service when that service was converted to AC operation. This is a photo by the late Andrew Hoskins, copyright to Derek Hoskins. Again, it's used under the Creative Commons licence. So what they did, they parked two coaches of one of these Class 303s on this spare round from Fairfield Junction. They connected the pantograph on the roof of the 303 to the feeder station at Gorton, the 25,000 volt AC feeder station. These were 25,000 volt AC units, but in common with most of the units of the time, the motors were actually DC via a system of rectifiers, etc. inside the train. It converted the 25,000 volt AC current into a DC output. So as I said, they stood it on there, they connected it to the overhead supply on the Hadfield line, the 25,000 volt AC, and then they allowed it to flow through all the internal system on the train. And they took a feed from the motors, the DC motors, and fed it to the overhead wiring on the temporary demonstration line, which made it 750 volts DC. It was quite an ingenious way to do it. Essentially, the 303 acted as a mobile substation, but it wasn't worth building an actual substation for a 3-week trial, so it was quite an ingenious and cost-effective way of doing it. So the demonstration line opened on the 10th of March 1987, which was a Tuesday. It was opened by David Mitchell, a minister at the Ministry of Transport, or the Department of Transport, should I say. On the previous day, Monday the 9th of March, various officials of the PTE had been given a demonstration before it officially opened. It was there for about 3 weeks. In the week, it was just open to interested people from the industry. That invited guests would come down. So, people from other PTEs, from other local councils who were considering introducing light rail vehicles, people from the partner firms such as GEC, Fairclough Engineering. So they were brought down. It was only open to invited industry guests. However, at weekends, it was open to the public. It opened on 2 weekends. You can see this, it's a printout of a poster that was done at the time. So on the 14th and 15th of March, and on the 20th, 21st and 22nd, it was open to the public. You couldn't just turn up, you had to book a ticket. You did it by post, you applied to the PTE by post. Tickets cost 50p, as you can see, or 25p child. Now, there wasn't any parking at Debdale Park, so the price of the ticket included a shuttle bus from Piccadilly Rail Station. It also picked up at the car park at Store Street. If you wanted to park your car, you did that, parked at Store Street in the city centre, and then got on the shuttle bus. Took you to Debdale Park. You got a ride up and down on the light rail vehicle, and then the shuttle bus took you back to the middle of Manchester again, so it's quite a good 50p's worth. You've got a map there of the shuttle bus service and details of that as well. And the poster also included a mock-up of the Docklands Light Railway vehicle in Greater Manchester PTE livery with Bury as a destination. It never actually carried that livery, it was just done as an artist's impression for the poster. You will notice it's got contrasting doors a long time before they became a requirement for disabled access regulations. So yeah, the trial was popular. A lot of people came along and sampled a ride. It gave a good account of itself, and it increased interest in light rail systems, not just in Manchester but in other towns and cities around the country. But it gave Greater Manchester PTE the determination to continue with their system, and Metrolink, the first phase, opened in 1992, so we can count it as a success. The Docklands Light Railway car went off to GEC. It was taken away by low loader. One half of it was driven through Manchester city centre so people could see what a light rail vehicle would look like in the middle of the city. Then it was sent off down to the Docklands. The pantograph had been removed, and it became the Royal Tram. It performed the royal opening carrying Her Majesty the Queen. The first batch of light rail vehicles for Docklands was sold off in 1992 to Essen in Germany. Unfortunately, Car 11 became the first one to be withdrawn and scrapped in 2017, so it doesn't survive anymore. The platform components went off to Hagfold station on the Atherton line, where they were used to build part of the station there. And apparently some of the modern poles that were put in place to support the overhead went off to the Heaton Park tramway, where they were used on part of the Lakeside extension. The former British Rail structures for the overhead remained in place. The line closed to all traffic in 1988. The remaining freight traffic was diverted away, and then the overhead electrification structures were removed shortly afterwards. Nowadays it's the Fallowfield Loop footpath and cycleway. As I said, there will hopefully be a follow-up to this video where I go and visit the site. The footpath and cycleway formerly used the original railway bridge to cross Hyde Road. So in this shot, the old Hyde Road station would have been off to the right, and that's where the temporary Debdale Park station would have been, and then towards Reddish Depot to the left. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, they widened Hyde Road, so they demolished the old railway bridge and they've put this more generic footbridge in. Also, as part of the road widening, they lost the access to the former goods yard. You can see here from a picture of a few years ago. You can see the gate post, and then the access would have gone up here. The surface is long gone, it's all been sort of returned to nature in this view. But this is how it was. So this would be the access road up to the old goods yard and where the Debdale Park temporary station was. And then in a more modern view you can see, because they've built a new retaining wall for the wider road, they've lost that. You just about see where it all was in there, but they've built across it. So there's very little left. So I don't expect to see much when I do go, but as I say, if you're watching this after September 2023, then please have a look on my channel. The other video should be on. I will visit the site. We'll have a walk down from the site of the Debdale Park temporary station down to where Reddish Depot used to be. That's been redeveloped for housing as far as I know. I'll just leave you with another couple of views of the photographs I've been using in this one of the demonstration line. So I hope you found the video interesting. I found it interesting, that's why I did a video on it. I wasn't really aware of it. I'd seen brief references to a Docklands Light Railway vehicle running in Manchester, but I wasn't aware of the story. I kind of discovered it recently in a book, and yeah, it flicked my switch, so I thought I'd do a video on it. So as always, thank you for joining me. Take care, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.